Public sector budgets are the lifeblood of government operations, from funding essential services like healthcare, education, and infrastructure to maintaining national security. The fiscal policies introduced during Donald Trump's presidency have significantly influenced the financial planning of state and federal governments across the U.S. These policies, characterized by tax reforms, changes to government spending, and shifting priorities, have reshaped how governments approach budgeting for various sectors. This video explores the top 10 ways Trump's policies have impacted public sector budgets, with a focus on how they continue to shape public finance in 2025. 1. Tax cuts and their effect on federal revenue. Trump's signature tax cuts, passed in 2017, were aimed at stimulating economic growth by reducing corporate taxes and income taxes for individuals. However, these cuts also led to a reduction in federal revenue, as the government collected fewer taxes. This reduction in revenue has forced public sector budgets, particularly at the federal level, to reallocate spending. With less income coming in, there has been an increased reliance on borrowing, leading to a growing national debt. These cuts have had a long-term impact on federal budgeting, with trade-offs in social services, defense spending, and infrastructure funding. 2. Increased defense spending. During Trump's presidency, defense spending saw a significant increase. Trump advocated for a stronger military presence and expanded funding for national defense. As a result, the federal budget allocated a larger share of resources to the Pentagon and related military spending, which in turn led to shifts in other areas. While the defense budget grew, other areas such as social programs and environmental protections often saw budget cuts. The reallocation of funds has had lasting effects on public sector budgets, particularly at the state and local levels, which rely on federal funding for services like healthcare and education. 3. Cuts to social programs. Trump's administration made substantial cuts to social welfare programs, including Medicaid, food stamps, SNAP, and housing assistance. These cuts, often implemented through budgetary reductions or changes in eligibility, impacted both state and federal budgets. States that relied heavily on federal funds for social services were forced to adjust their budgets, often reducing state-level spending on public health, education, and affordable housing. As a result, many states experienced an increase in the number of citizens relying on state-funded services, placing greater strain on local budgets. 4. Deregulation and its impact on regulatory agencies. Trump's policies emphasized deregulation, particularly in industries such as energy, healthcare, and environmental protection. This deregulation reduced the operational costs of federal agencies tasked with enforcing regulations, such as the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, and the Department of Labor. While this led to cost savings at the federal level, it also impacted public sector budgets by shifting the financial burden onto states and local governments. With fewer federal resources allocated to enforcement, states had to step in to regulate industries and protect public health and safety, leading to increased local government spending. 5. Changes to healthcare spending. Trump's administration sought to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, ACA, which significantly impacted federal and state healthcare budgets. Though the repeal efforts were unsuccessful, they led to budget uncertainty and changes in funding for healthcare programs like Medicaid and Medicare. States that expanded Medicaid under the ACA faced new budgetary pressures, while those that did not expand Medicaid saw fewer federal funds allocated to support healthcare services. This shift forced many state budgets to reallocate funding to cover the increasing cost of healthcare for low-income populations. 6. Infrastructure investment and budget allocation. Trump's proposed infrastructure investment plan aimed at revitalizing the nation's roads, bridges, and other critical infrastructure was a key policy initiative during his presidency. However, this plan faced challenges in implementation, and the promised federal investment in infrastructure was not fully realized. As a result, states and local governments were often left to shoulder the financial burden of infrastructure projects, leading to significant shifts in public sector budgets. Many state governments had to reprioritize spending, often diverting funds from other areas to finance infrastructure improvements. 7. Immigration policy changes and public sector costs. Trump's hardline immigration policies, including the construction of a border wall and the reduction of refugee admissions, had notable financial impacts on public sector budgets. Increased border security measures and deportation efforts led to higher federal spending on immigration enforcement, impacting federal and state budgets. Local governments, particularly those near the southern border, experienced increased costs related to housing and providing services to immigrants. The reallocation of resources toward immigration enforcement meant fewer funds were available for other critical public services, such as education and healthcare. 8. Changes to federal grants for education. Under Trump's administration, there was a shift in the federal funding model for education, with a push for school choice and charter school programs. This change led to reductions in federal grants for traditional public schools, forcing local school districts to adjust their budgets. Some states increased their own funding for education to make up the gap, while others had to make tough decisions regarding teacher salaries, class sizes, and resources for students. These shifts had a long-term effect on public sector education budgets, with varying impacts across different states. 9. Environmental policy changes and budget reallocations. Trump's environmental policies, which sought to reduce the federal government's role in climate change regulation and environmental protections, had significant implications for public sector budgets. The rollback of environmental regulations placed additional responsibility on state and local governments to enforce environmental protections and address climate-related issues. States that have faced the brunt of climate change, such as those experiencing wildfires, hurricanes, or droughts, were forced to increase their spending on disaster response and environmental protection, leading to budget reallocations that affected other public services. 10. Impact on federal-state relations and funding disputes. Trump's policies created tensions between the federal government and state governments, particularly over funding disputes related to healthcare, education, and social programs. States that disagreed with Trump's budgetary priorities, such as those with Democratic leadership, often found themselves in conflict with the federal government over funding allocations. This dynamic led to shifts in state-level public sector budgets, as states had to find alternative funding sources or adjust their spending to compensate for reductions in federal funding. Donald Trump's policies have had a profound impact on public sector budgets across the United States. From tax cuts and deregulation to changes in healthcare and immigration policies, these moves have forced state and federal governments to adapt their financial plans. Some areas, like defense spending and infrastructure, have seen increased funding, while others, particularly social welfare and healthcare programs, have faced cuts. As the country continues to feel the effects of these policies, public sector budgets will need to remain flexible and responsive to evolving economic conditions and political priorities. The long-term consequences of these fiscal decisions will continue to shape the financial landscape of the U.S. government and its relationship with citizens.